the M&P Shield has been causing a lot of stir and has been making a lot of noise in the market recently, as a lot of people are gravitating towards smaller, more compact, slimmer firearms for concealed carry, especially in hotter months. And the Smith & Wesson M&P kind of burst on the scene out of nowhere, and people are really gravitating towards it, almost kind of like it's revolutionary. And as I touched upon in my last video, though the Smith & Wesson M&P is a great gun and I've really come to love it, it isn't revolutionary, and there are guns that have been basically doing what the Smith & Wesson M&P is attempting to do way before the Smith & Wesson M&P was ever a figment in somebody's imagination, or at least the Shield for that matter. And what that gun was the Walther PPS. So what I want to do is kind of delve right into this review in this head-to-head comparison between the Walther PPS and the Smith & Wesson M&P Shield, and see which one favors best. I've always been a fan of the aesthetic profile of the Smith & Wesson M&P series. So considering that basically they've kept all the aesthetic attributes of the M&P line and kept them in the Shield, I was really happy about that, as I stated before. And as far as looks are concerned, when we start talking about the polymer wonders of the world, whether it be H&K, the Glock, and the Smith & Wessons and things of that sort, I have to say that as far as aesthetics, I really do love the way the M&P Shield looks. I think it is a very handsome looking gun, and I think that the design cues are they're subtle enough. They're subtle enough not to be too abrasive, but then they're also unique enough to stand out among other polymer handguns when you look at them. I am a fan of how this grip texture looks. It looks inviting. It looks like something you actually would want to hold in your hand, and not something that's going to look like it's going to be too abrasive. I'm a fan of the actual slide serrations here, as the kind of fish or snake scale kind of give it a little flair to it, as opposed to the straight up and down or kind of slanted slide serrations that we're usually accustomed to on firearms. So from that standpoint, overall, I really am impressed with the way this gun looks. And then seeing it laying flat down, considering its profile, it really does, it just, that slim profile kind of gives it a little bit even more unique look versus the other M&P series type guns that are out there. And I'm really digging that a lot. So from an aesthetic standpoint, as far as the M&P goes, I'm a fan of it. I really do like it. When we start talking about the Walther PPS, and as far as how the Walther PPS looks, I've always been inclined to think that all the Walthers kind of look like they were constructed from a Lego set. There was nothing really, it still manages to look like a refined handgun, but then at the same time it doesn't look like there's really any character or really essence kind of put into the designing of the Walther. It's just kind of really straight and down to the point, really kind of blocky like. So like if you had a Lego set and we're going to put together a gun using a Lego set, this is what I think the gun would end up looking like. Like there's nothing about the design that's just very inviting, that just makes you, that evokes some type of feeling about it whenever you see it. The grip texture on this firearm, on the actual handle of the firearm, it looks really basic, kind of really elementary, and almost mediocre to a degree. And it doesn't look very inviting, much like the Smith & Wesson M&P does. And for the most part, it just looks real blocky. Not like a Glock blocky, but kind of like a playset kind of blocky. Glocks tend to have a more 2x4 kind of blockiness to them, but the Walthers to a degree almost kind of have this, like I keep saying, the Lego Play-Doh set type boxiness to them that isn't typical with most other guns. Now, I don't think it's a bad thing, but compared to the Smith & Wesson M&P, I think the Smith & Wesson M&P looks better aesthetically than the Walther PPS. So I'm pretty sure there are going to be some people out there who prefer the look of the PPS, but my personal take on it, I'm not a really huge fan of it. It just really doesn't do anything for me in the looks department. But it's not bad. It's not ugly. It just doesn't really do anything for me. It doesn't move me at all. So with that being said, if I had to make a decision as far as looks were concerned, I think I'd have to go with the Smith & Wesson M&P. The ergonomic system on the M&P tend to be a lot better compared to most other handguns in its class. And the same goes for the Smith & Wesson M&P Shield as well, because it in essence takes the same type of grip frame and texture that you get from the regular M&P series. And I'm glad that they did that, because this is a comfortable gun to carry. It is a comfortable gun to hold in your hand. It's really soft. The grip texture gives you just enough grip to hold on to it, but it's not abrasive at all. It is a gun that you're going to enjoy having in your hands, and it's not going to tire your hands out. It's not going to rough them up or anything of that sort. You also get a real high bore access to the gun, really similar to the Glock as well. So that really aids in the recoil and also gives you a real positive feeling whenever it's in your hand. You don't feel like the gun's going to jump right out of your hand, considering how small the grip is. So ergonomically, I have to say that this gun is really comfortable in your hand, especially considering how small it is. And as far as all the functions on the gun, with the safety, your ability to sweep on and off without any issue, I really like that a lot. And then you have free reign and access to the slide lock as well. And I think that it does a really good job in the ergonomics department as far as the Smith & Wesson M&P series go. And the Shield takes right after the M&P series as well. So it follows suit right behind the M&P and does a great job in the ergonomics department. Now, with the PPS, the ergonomic system on the PPS is pretty standard, and I dare say traditional, or maybe even archaic. And the reason I say that is because you can see here, they just kind of utilize the same checkered line and then like these dots, which kind of baffles me, because I think these dots are utterly useless. And it's almost comical to think that these dots will be effective, as you don't feel them really at all whenever you're gripping this firearm. The funny thing about it is, though, this gun is actually pretty ergonomical in your hand. Even though it takes an archaic approach to it, it kind of works. And the reason why it works is mainly due in part to this indentation here, where the slight hump starts to begin, and being able to get your hand right up under the bore is a very comforting feeling. You feel like you really have more control of the gun, and when it starts to recoil and rock on you, you can manage the gun a lot better. So in that regard, I have to say that even though it takes a bit of an archaic approach to the ergonomic system on this particular firearm, it still feels comfortable. Now, it isn't going to have that organic feeling that you get with the Smith & Wesson M&P Shield, but it still works just the same. So as far as ergonomics are concerned, I would probably more or less go with the M&P Shield, but if I had to go with the PPS, it really wouldn't be too different for me. It's a different way of approaching ergonomics, but it would work all the same. So from that standpoint, ergonomically, I'm probably leaning towards the Smith & Wesson M&P Shield, but like I said, if this works, I have all the controls that I need right there in my reach, and we're good to go. The M&P series on the Smith & Wesson are noted for having pretty shitty stock triggers. The triggers just really weren't that great, to be honest. And with the addition of the Shield, Smith & Wesson boasted that the trigger was newly designed and a lot better. And honestly, I have to agree with them that this trigger is definitely an improvement from the previous M&P series, simply because now you have a more pronounced reset, and you have a more tactile auditory feel as well whenever you're firing this gun. So as you see here, this is going to be your uptake right up until you hit that wall. Now, this uptake is slightly gritty. It's nothing over the top, but it is kind of noticeable as far as the grit. It isn't silky smooth, but it is slightly gritty. The good thing about it is that the uptake is short. It's right there. As soon as you let it go, you hit the wall. So that is a good thing, especially considering it isn't the smoothest of triggers. And then after you reach this point, it breaks. The break is clean. It's nice. It is pronounced. It is a very pronounced break, and it's really springy. So if you hear it, you'll hear the spring. It's very springy, and I like it simply because from the last trigger pull, it really wasn't that great to begin with. Now, another noted improvement, as I said before, was the reset on this. The reset is now more blatant, more positive, because before it was pretty much non-existent. That's your reset right there. Now, it isn't great, trust me, by any stretch of imagination, this is not great, but it gets the job done, and it's a lot better than what you had in dealing with the M&Ps of old versus the Shield of new. So there you go. as far as the trigger is concerned. And the trigger is pretty heavy for a polymer frame handgun, and noticeably, but I think it works still. I really do. Granted, I think they could have made a little bit more smoother trigger, a little bit lighter, simply because you have this safety here, if that was really a concern. But for the most part, the trigger is really good. Now, the trigger on the PPS, initially when you first start pulling the trigger on this thing, it kind of sucks. It's kind of gritty, and it's not very long, which is good, but it leaves much to be desired. It's kind of spongy and gritty at the same time, which is a feat beyond my imagination. But it kind of runs this that stupid Glock safe action trigger deal with the little blade in the middle, and the blade is kind of annoying because it doesn't fully compress and kind of sticks up a little bit. But the trigger is really kind of spongy, and it's kind of really hard to judge where it's gonna break. And so I'm not really a big fan of that. As you start really handling the gun and you know, dry firing it more and more and more, you actually, or at least I know I did, I started to like the trigger a little bit more. Now the uptake isn't long, it's pretty short, just like it is on the M&P Shield, and then it breaks. Now the break isn't as clean as the M&P Shield, and this one seems to be more mechanical, while the M&P Shield tends to be a little bit more springy. Now the problem with this gun, as far as the trigger is concerned, is the reset. The reset almost feels like it's not gonna come back, kind of almost like the trigger's stuck, and then it just pops out. Which kind of makes it hard to really judge the reset on this particular firearm. So I think that's definitely something that could be improved. As you see, it's almost like the trigger is stuck, and then it'll pop out. So as far as the trigger is concerned, it could be a lot better. You do start to like it a little bit more the more you start to fire it, and I think it's definitely something that under firing situations that is probably a lot better than when you're just dry firing it. But just from a dry firing standpoint, it's not that great. Now when we start talking about the size of these two firearms, they're basically in essence the same. As you can see here, the width of these two firearms are pretty much similar, and any differences there might be are going to be so minimal that you won't notice them from a functional everyday carry type situation. The thinness pretty much runs the same across the board. The Smith & Wesson M&P Shield tends to be a little bit more blocky, and the Walther PPS tends to be a little bit more streamlined, as you can see here. The biggest difference in size between the two is the fact that the PPQ is going to be a little bit longer than the Smith & Wesson M&P Shield. And it's really not by that much. Actually, that's about where the two differ in terms of length. And besides that, they're pretty much the same. Now, what I will say is this though: in hand, the Smith & Wesson M&P Shield feels a lot smaller than the PPQ. When the PPS is in your hand, you feel like you have more gun. Simply because, yes, it is a little bit longer, and because of the type of ergonomic system, it just feels like you're running with a bigger gun than you would be when you have the Smith & Wesson M&P Shield in hand. The M&P feels noticeably smaller than the PPQ, but from a carrying standpoint, when you're having it in the waistband or something to that effect, they don't feel different at all. It's only when it's in hand and you're running a gun. So if you want to feel like you have more gun, the PPS would probably be a better option as opposed to the Smith & Wesson M&P Shield, simply because the Shield really does feel like a smaller gun in hand. Weight-wise, I don't notice anything different. The PPS has a little bit more weight to it, a little bit more heft, as you would say, but not so much so that it would kind of break the balance in terms of which gun you would go with. There are other factors that would pretty much determine that would kind of seal the deal as far as which gun somebody would decide to go with in that regard. At the end of the day, if I had to choose one of these guns that I would run with, it would more likely be the Smith & Wesson M&P Shield, for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons is, as far as the cost, the Smith & Wesson M&P Shield is going to be noticeably cheaper or more affordable than the Walther PPS, especially when we're talking about things like magazines. The Walther PPS magazine can run you about $50, as opposed to the M&P Shield magazine, which is going to be a little bit cheaper. And then overall, MSRP prices as well, the M&P is going to be cheaper. And the reason why I would inevitably end up with a Smith & Wesson M&P Shield, simply because considering the price and that between the two guns, it's kind of more or less a toss-up in terms of which one is better than the other. I would notably have to go with the M&P Shield. It has a little bit of a more organic feel to it, which I like, as opposed to the more kind of basic, traditional like type gun feeling that you get in hand with the PPS. So at the end of the day, the Smith & Wesson M&P Shield kind of calls more to me. It does feel like a lot smaller gun. I kind of almost wish that the M&P Shield kind of had that more big gun feeling like you get with the PPS, but it's not so much as to be a deal breaker between the two firearms. The Walther PPS is a more than formidable gun in its class, and I think it bests any other gun out there, just as well as the M&P Shield does. Now, the M&P Shield has some newness going for it, so it's a bit more exciting, whereas the Walther has kind of been out and, tried and true, I guess, for the most part. There are a lot of people who live and die by the Walther, and they swear to it to their grave. Everything else seems to be the same as far as magazine capacity is concerned. Even though the Walther has a 6, 7, or 8 round capacity magazine, the Smith & Wesson M&P Shield, you either have 7 or you have 8. Either way, considering how small and how slim and how carryable these guns are, I think the capacity is really, really good between these two firearms. So with that being said, that's Mr. Cody on the War. This is the Smith & Wesson M&P Shield versus the PPS Walther, and I'm out.